What's up, world? It looks like I'm up and going. If everything's going right. I'm trying to check to see. Let me show you what I'm seeing. This is my fly behind the scenes stuff. Is there anything on here that you're not supposed to see? Stream URL? I don't think so. Okay. I'll double check that later. But I'm trying to do this whole live thing for my Wirecast presenter here. What's up, guys? Noah from Hacking Hollywood. Hey, today we're going to be talking about what differences there are between the different types of production, whether you're working on a network show or one of the big shows for like ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, the big studios, or if you're working on an independent film. So I have my own kind of definition of this. I think it's pretty universal from the 7 years I've been working in the business, but that's what we're going to talk about today. So let me jump over to this guy here. This video I put out, I worked on a show called Jane the Virgin, and I had a comment from Braid, and I kind of talk you through what he and I were discussing, which is kind of cool. So he is a PA that works in Vancouver. So he is up in the north, and there are a lot of great feature films and stuff that are shot up there. There's probably some great crews up there. So I'll also talk a little bit about the insight I got from him and the differences that I've seen between working in Hollywood and working in other parts of the world on filmmaking. So, all right, let's dive back into it. So, I was talking essentially on this little vlog that I shot on set. I had an hour-long lunch, and so that's what his comment was about. And he was saying essentially that was an easy gig because we had an hour-long lunch, and he was describing that his gigs are the best when they're studio prep wrap gigs because they, when you're doing studio work or prep work or wrap work, they tend to be easier. On location days like Fridays are the worst. And so what he means by that essentially is, when you're shooting in the studio, you're in a controlled environment, right? So you're on sound stages, which are big giant warehouses that are have been soundproofed. So it's a more controlled environment, and so it's a lot simpler of a shoot because you're not trying to control outside noises and outside traffic. Usually sets are intentional. They're built a certain way to essentially benefit the production to make things run smoother, and it's tailored specific to the shoot. So that's what's cool about being on a studio or a lot, is they have a controlled environment. And so, yes, they are typically easier than being on location. Prep days and wrap days tend to also be easier than a full production day because usually a prep or wrap day isn't a full 14 to 18-hour work day like set would be. So that's kind of I would agree with you definitely saying Braid, I'm going to forget the name, Braid, I'm going to agree with him definitely because that's how I've seen it too. So, but generally what's interesting is PAs don't get a lot of wrap days or prep days. It's usually the walkie PA that might have a day or two, or depending on how big the show is, it could be longer. But usually it's ADs, and those, when you're an AD, you definitely have a lot of wrap. A lot of prep, I should say, a lot of prep time, doing schedules, doing building, getting your team together, breaking down the script, all that kind of fun stuff. So, that's definitely a big difference. Fridays, sorry, I'm jumping back to the notes he wrote. So, Fridays are when you work Friday night and it bleeds into Saturday morning. And so how that could happen is kind of two ways. One is like, since you're working 14 to 16, 18-hour days, you start Monday, 6 a.m. call, you work 14, 16 hours. Tuesday, you're in a 9 a.m. call, and it just keeps going throughout the week until Friday, your call is 1 p.m., and you're working all night, and you're up until the next morning and you're driving home, And that kind of syncs too if you have an overnight show or shoot, I should say, if you have certain days that you start, your call might be 5 p.m., and you'll work 14 hours, right? And so sometimes, with a 3 or 4 or 5 p.m. call, I'll hit traffic, evening traffic when people are going home, and then I'll get up, when I'm heading home the next morning, I'm hitting traffic from people commuting back into work. So that Saturday type stuff is horrible, especially in LA, where you would think a 2-mile drive would only take you, 10 minutes when it takes you an hour and a half, something like that, something crazy. So anyways, it's pretty gnarly for sure. So as far as Vancouver goes and what you guys do up there, it might be a little bit different than what we do in Hollywood, which is what we kind of talked about next. So I was kind of asking him, explaining, oh, yes, I was explaining the 1 hour lunch versus a 30-minute lunch. So in California, or in Hollywood, I should say, let me see if I get this right. There we go. Okay. So in Hollywood, we tend to stick to 30 minutes lunches. That's pretty common. That's pretty standard. Probably 85–90% of the shows I'm on, that's the standard is 30. But when we're on a studio show, or on the lot, I should say, when we're shooting more on stage and it's a controlled environment, production tends to try to do an hour lunch. And I think it's for two main reasons. One is they think that once you call, well, let me go back a little bit. When you're working on a show and it's a 30-minute lunch, they usually call lunch 6 hours after crew call. So that's when everybody generally is supposed to be there. Now, there's something called pre-call, where people come in early, and that's usually PAs in different departments where they need prep time to work on stuff before the masses get there, the 100 and 150 people get to set, right? And so say your call is 6 a.m. So that's when everybody's supposed to be ready to rehearse. 6 a.m., your talent's walking in and they go straight to rehearsal, depending on the show. They're ready to go at 6 a.m. for that rehearsal, and shooting call might be a little bit after that, right? So 6 a.m. call, that means, at least in California, 6 hours from that call time, which would be 12 noon, right, lunch. 12 noon is the 6 hour mark, and so that's what we're aiming for. And if we go over that, there's like certain rules and graces and stuff that give penalties and meal penalties and that kind of stuff. And so, but yeah, typically it's 6 hours after. And so if they call lunch at 12 o'clock in a 30-minute meal, on the paper, on your paperwork, it's going to be marked as 12 to 12.5, which is military time. It's 12 to 12:30. It's fancy, I know. I'll explain that in another video. And so for an hour-long lunch, they would call lunch at 12, but on paper it would be 12 to 1, right? So the difference is, if we called a half-hour lunch, we would all walk over to the lunch line, right, and go to catering and all eat food. And essentially, once the general crew goes through, as PAs, we're watching the line, keeping track of who's going through the line. And so some shows are really picky where they want to know what each department, what time they're eating and that kind of stuff. But generally it's like, let the crew go through and you kind of keep track of time and say, okay, well, last man was 12:12, so we're back in at 12:42. All that means is we're waiting, and it took 12 minutes for 100 to 150 people to go through the line. And so we want to make sure that last person who hits the line has a 30-minute window for them to eat. And so that's the courtesy that they do. So on paper, it's 12 to 12:30, but in real life, it's 12:12 to 12:42. And so at 12:42, we call back in, right? So as PAs, as ADs, we call the crew back on the set where we can continue our day. So for a 1 hour lunch, it might be called at 12, so we're not keeping track of last man. The crew just knows with 1 hour lunch that you're supposed to be back on set, ready to go at 1 p.m. or 1 hour after that's called. And so there's kind of debate. I'm sure producers and line producers have this figured out. But from my knowledge, essentially, that 1 hour lunch is kind of a better courtesy for your crew, but you still have to finish your day. There's shots that have been planned. There's scenes that have been planned for that day that need to get done. And so with a 1 hour lunch, you could run into having more time spent at lunch, but it's also deducted time. So your crew doesn't get paid for that time because it's their lunch break. And so there's some trade-offs. Generally, ADs and other, the director and VIPs, essentially, they tend to work through lunch, even if it's an hour lunch for some reason, because they're super passionate about what they do and they care about the product that they're producing, even if it's, corporate television, so to speak. So the difference would be like if you had a 30-minute lunch plus you had last man, that would mean you would call the crew back at 12:42. In the other scenario where it's an hour lunch, your crew's out until 1 p.m. And so there's a huge difference. It's 18 minutes or something. 3 clicks is what we call it. So 6-minute increments. Each click is a 6-minute mark. So anyways, that 18 minutes is 18 minutes less that you have to be on set and get you home a little bit faster. So that's the difference. At the same time, there are people who essentially take that hour-long time to take a nap, to call their family, to run an errand. So there's trade-offs to both, definitely. So let's jump back and see if he mentioned anything else that we want to talk about here. So yeah, it doesn't typically happen on location. It's definitely something that happens on the studio. So he was saying for some of his jobs, they have a van driver deliver lunches for us as they eat on our spot, since I'm standing there like on the side of the road. So yeah, that's not super typical, at least out here in California, to have a van driver bring you lunch. If you're on an important lock up where you're stationed in a certain spot where your PA and your AD needs you to be there for a certain reason, you have a safety or fire lockup, that happens. We will send a PA or somebody with a lunch out to you, but typically that's going to happen on second unit stuff or bigger shows. And we try, at least when I've been an AD, we try to have our team sit down and actually have a meal with a plate and that kind of stuff. I'm gonna grab some water. Yeah. So in his particular case, yeah, I've heard of that happening. I've personally delivered hot lunches to people on lockups, but I tend to actually just offer to switch off with them. That way they can actually sit down and be comfortable for the 10 or 15 minutes we actually get to eat, even though it's scheduled and deducted as a 30-minute lunch. That tends to only happen on a rare occasion. So, yeah. So, yeah, I basically read what he was talking about and said, let's see, where do you do production? Sounds like indie film, sack lunches. So I had kind of a negative spin on that, you guess you can say, which I still kind of do. I guess I would like to try to have a solid meal and a solid 30 minutes, especially since it's not my first year doing this anymore. It's not my first gig. I've been through the times where you're working through lunch and it sucks, and I've been on set where you don't eat for 10 hours straight. You're working and stuff's crazy and they don't call lunch, or you're in a particular situation. I had a certain celebrity who showed up 3 hours late and wanted to leave early, and so sometimes it can get a little crazy. And so that's kind of one of the major differences between a smaller non-union project versus a larger union project. The bigger union projects tend to try to protect their crew, and they have this established system and these unions that help protect the labor, which is us, the crew. And in the independent world, they tend to cut a lot of corners and try to get stuff done for as cheaply as possible. And there's pluses and minuses to both. And I've been on both sides of the world there as far as independent stuff goes versus network shows go. And so when I described in the beginning of the episode that the difference that I see between independent films and projects versus the big network shows, to me is two things, I guess. One is like the big name, right? The ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, Paramount Pictures. There's probably somebody I've forgotten. Those large players, HBO, right? Those tend to be the brand name is one, right? Having that credibility, and they shoot all over the world, like Vancouver's what Brand said. And the second thing that to me determines like network or big show versus small show is union status, right? So 80, 90%, if not, honestly, I can't remember the last show that I've worked on that had more than 100 people on set that wasn't union. Except, I guess some independent features that I worked on that had 100 extras that day. But generally speaking, as far as the crew goes, if you're dealing with a larger crew where you have multiple cameras and you have a full genie crew and hair, makeup, wardrobe, costumes, all with a key and people under them with hierarchies and all that kind of fun stuff. Generally speaking, on those bigger budget stuff, they're going to go ahead and go union, and they're going to have crews that are more experienced. That's one of the perks about being union. or working on union projects is you're working with people who generally have more experience. Don't come after me in the comments and say that indies rule and you guys have just as much experience. I'm sure a lot of people do, but in my experience, that's kind of what I've gotten from the indie world. And so, yeah. Let's see. He says none of these are indie films. These are everything from straight to DVD to TV movies, TV shows, and feature films. So I guess it depends on your definition of indie. So the one I outlined, I don't know. I obviously didn't work on the shows you worked on. So maybe 100% of those don't fit my description. So totally cool. Maybe they were all big budget shows, but I guess because of the Hollywood union system that's developed, we typically don't have PAs sharing responsibilities for other departments, as in camera assistants or transpo drivers or hair and makeup, wardrobe. If they are helping in another department, they are PA under that department. So a camera PA or a transpo PA, which I haven't really heard of, but I have heard of a costume PA. So typically when I think or talk about PAs, production assistants, which is like an entry-level job in the film industry, it's under the assistant directing department. And so assistant directors set schedules and run the show, run the set, and they're the guys who kind of set the heartbeat and the pace, and they're the captain of the ship a lot of the times. Even though, people outside the industry think it's actually the directors who do all that, the director focuses on the vision of the project, and they work directly with the actors, and they give the actors feedback, and they coach the actors, where the AD is focused on the technical stuff and the logistical stuff. And so that takes a lot of stress off of the director to think about the moments and creating story, whereas the AD focuses on the logistics and making sure that they can shoot everything they need to in that day, and that the schedule makes sense long term, and they have the big picture overall going, especially the first AD. And so first ADs work a lot with the producers and the executive producers to help kind of figure that out. And when it comes to the set, the first AD is the voice of the set. That's the one you're going to hear the most on the radio, and they're going to be the most active and the most vocal. So, yeah. You guys don't have van drivers. So we do have van drivers, especially when we're on location. We don't typically have van drivers for studio shoots. And we might have one or two, and there is an exception there. But generally, when we're on the lot, when we're working at the studio, I should say, the transpo department shrinks down a lot, meaning the transpo captain who's in charge of that department doesn't call 8 drivers out or 10 transpo, what are they called? Transpo drivers? Transpo? Whatever you are in the I'm sorry, I don't know if you're a transpo person. I just call them transpo. So somebody within that department, I know there's like specific positions, and I'm sure eventually I'll be outlining them in a future video. That way I don't get embarrassed and somebody yell at me later, but always learning, thumbs up for that. So yeah, when it comes to studio shoots, they're not studio days. They're not transporting hundreds of people around. There might be a single driver for VIPs. If you think of a lot or a studio, a film studio, Fox, Paramount Pictures, Sony Pictures, Manhattan Beach Studios, these places are kind of like college campuses where they have multiple buildings and they're spread out. I guess spread out's the wrong term. They could be next to each other, but it could be a half-mile stretch. It could be a mile-long stretch between where base camp is, where they're getting hair and makeup and ready for set, and where their cast trailers are, to where set is. And so sometimes when it's 85, 95, 100 degrees outside, it's nice to have a van driver transport the talent to set from base camp. And so that driver in an AC van would take them to set or to the sound stage that we're shooting on, which is super helpful. When we don't have a transpo person on, the ADs or the PAs or the base camp PA or the DGA trainee, one of those positions, would essentially supervise and make sure that the talent gets to set. And so that's one of the logistical things that we work on and that we do while we're moving people to and from set. So yes, let's see what else. Yeah, so mostly PAs, splinter unit. Yeah, so we at least my mentality is that we try to assist each other and not leave somebody in a lockup throughout the whole lunch period so that everybody gets to eat. Van drivers do other things though. I'm not talking about transport. So it sounds like van drivers and transportation. I don't know. Maybe Brady, you can kind of clarify this, but in from the experience that I've had in Hollywood, transpo, anybody driving a van should be under transpo, right? That department. So PAs aren't really supposed to be driving vans. As far as the big network shows, that's why I kind of lumped what you were talking about as an independent show, possibly, because generally PAs don't drive vans. Now, I have driven a van as a PA, but only on a non-union commercial. And so I actually have heard horror stories about PAs driving trucks and PAs crashing and getting in accidents, and then production not, covering them. Essentially, they try to blame it on the PA. And so if you're ever in a situation, I would strongly encourage you to not drive if you're a PA, and if you do, get it in writing that it is covered, and play hardball, man, because you want to make sure that you're covered. And that's one of the things I like to talk about on this channel is I want to try to set you up for success, and I want to tell you the things that I've seen and learned about so that you have a leg up if you are working in Hollywood or working in the industry, or if you are deciding in the future to come out and work, in the industry, to get some tips and that kind of stuff from somebody who's done this before. So I'm definitely not going to know everything, but I hope I have some sort of advice and input to pass on to somebody else. So that would definitely be one of those things that I would love to pass on and save some people headaches. So, yeah. What else? Yeah, he was saying that you guys have transport guys doing PA prep jobs. So that was a little bit of confusion on my part. I probably misworded some stuff. But like I said earlier, PAs don't typically prep unless it's one PA doing walkies or something like that. So as far as transport, again, van drivers should be under transportation, which is a department. And so that's not a PA's responsibility, generally speaking, in Hollywood. So I'd say 20% of the movies, of all movies, there are filmed in Vancouver. Maybe 20% of or 50% of what you've seen in theaters. I think that's kind of a high number. But hey, who knows? You might have seen a lot of movies. The ones that you've seen have been the ones you worked on, which is awesome. Vancouver shoots a lot. Michigan, I hear. Austin, New Orleans. There's tons of stuff being shot. Definitely, I've noticed that feature films tend to be shot outside of Los Angeles, and a lot of the productions that are done here tend to be television shows and stuff that they can repeat and do multiple times and use the sets multiple times. And I think that's what's powerful about Hollywood and the space and stuff that they have is the lot system, right? The studio space that they have. And so when they have a TV show that shoots on the same sets year after year after year, it makes sense to have a stored place that's optimal for that to happen. And so they've already got this really awesome system here in Hollywood where there's not just one lot that has 20 or 30 sound stages on it. There's like 7 or 8 major lots, and then there's hundreds of smaller lots or studios across the LA area, which is nuts and crazy to think. But yeah, that's what's so powerful and why I think a lot of the television shooting still happens in LA. As far as feature films and that kind of stuff, I think the main reason why they're shooting elsewhere is budget, right? Money, but they need specific locations a lot of the times to shoot in different areas. Now, that's not to say that in Vancouver and other places like Houston, there's not sound stages. There are a lot of the times, but there's just a lot more in this area. And so if you're shooting a TV show that needs 4 or 5 or 6 sound stages, and the producer already owns that property, aka if Fox already owns the Fox lot, they're going to use or try to use their own stuff. and even though they charge internally for their own stuff, so that's kind of interesting too. But anyways, let's see. I think I'm almost done here. Yeah, so I'm sure tons of stuff is being shot in Vancouver, so that's pretty cool. Of the stuff you've been able to work on. Let me know if you want to be on the show at some point, Braid. I'd love to do a Skype call with you and just kind of talk to you, and maybe we can discuss some more of the differences between the two places. But yeah, hopefully you guys, thanks for sticking on for this 25-30 minute show of me just rambling about set production. Maybe you've learned something fun about how the production world works. And so yeah, I'm going to try to be more regular with the series that I'm doing now. I've noticed that with my schedule and everything going on, I tend to not be focused on hacking Hollywood because I got to pay those bills. I got to get stuff done, and I'm also kind of rebranding and launching into the corporate world as far as video production goes because I've had some good success with clients and stuff there. So as that picks up, I'm kind of refocusing, and I realize that, hey, maybe I should jump back on, and like I said last time in the live stream, try to be more consistent, essentially, which I am not the best at. So, but hey, yeah, tomorrow I'm going to be speaking. I got a live stream set up. I found that live streams are ideal for me for two reasons. One is there's some pressure about live that you got to just get it done, right? And no matter what happens, you're going to roll on it, and it's going to happen. The second part that I love is there's no editing, and so I think that's been my hold up. Even though I really enjoy editing, I have to like get into it and like love the process. And right now, since I've been away from it a little bit, it's kind of like getting in water, so to speak, right? When you first jump in, it's freaking cold and you're trying to not do it. But once you're in there, you enjoy it. And so I figured this live situation setup for me would allow me to produce videos faster and be more consistent and not have to edit. So I'm going to stick to it, and maybe I'll kind of switch equipment around as I go. Excuse me. Whew, that was coming up for a while. Wow, I'm kind of rude, but thanks for enjoying that burp with me. Anyways, yeah, let me know if you have any more questions about Hollywood. Thanks for checking out this long video, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.